Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my full review of the Hifiman Ananda headphone, and I do want to mention that this is the older non-stealth version, and I had not reviewed this yet. I had reviewed several other Hifiman headphones, but hadn't had a chance to do the Ananda yet, and I'm assuming that Hifiman, who loaned this to me for review, wanted me to review this before I reviewed the stealth version. So I'm hoping that sometime after I review this, I'm hoping I will get the chance to review the stealth. And I'm hoping that possibly I'll have an overlap where I'll have both, where I can compare the two. But anyway, so I'll be in communication with Hifiman in the near future, and hopefully can get a hold of a pair of stealth Anandas. But this was reviewed or loaned to me for review by Hifiman, and it currently sells at $699 US, and you can still get both the non-stealth version and the stealth version, and they're both the same price at $699. And I haven't heard the stealth version of the Ananda, but I have reviewed the stealth version of the Aria, and I didn't have it at the same time, but I had a chance to review the version 1 of the Aria a couple of years ago, and there's quite a bit of difference, and not everyone prefers the newer version, so I'm not sure what the case is with the newer version of the Ananda, the stealth version. I don't know if it's better in every way, or if it's possible that some people are going to prefer the non-stealth version, which I'm reviewing now. So I'm assuming that's why it's still available, because they're possibly not sure if everyone's going to prefer the stealth version. The stealth version of the Aria improved in a lot of ways, but it did lose some soundstage width, which a lot of people actually prefer the versions 1 and 2 over the stealth version for that reason. So anyway, this is a full-size, over-the-ear, wired, open back headphone, and it uses a planar magnetic driver. It has an impedance of only 25 ohms and a sensitivity of 103 decibels at 1 milliwatt. So that sounds like it'd be extremely easy to drive, and it is fairly easy to drive. It's not the easiest to drive headphone I've heard, but it is a little bit, needs a little less power than the Sandara or the Edition XS. The weight of this is claimed to be 399 grams by Hifiman. It actually weighed in on my scale at 412, but that's still relatively light for a full-size headphone. And considering the size of the Ananda, that's actually, the large egg-shaped ear cups, it's actually pretty light. I did want to mention, this comes with it has a detachable cable, like all Hifiman headphones, and uses a standard 3.5 millimeter connections at the headphone end. And this one does have a 6.3 millimeter connection at the amp end. And it's covered with a rubber material, kind of a gray or silver color, but it's similar to the cable that comes with the Sandara and the Edition XS, sort of a rubberized material. It's flexible a little bit, and it's not great, but it's adequate. And Hifiman isn't really known for going overboard with their cables. They're decent, they sound fine, but there are nicer cables out there. But like I said, it sounds fine and it's more than adequate. But anyway, the biggest difference is the Sandara. In the Edition XS, the cables, which happen to be black, are only about 5 feet long, and this one's about 10 feet long for some reason. Actually, a little bit too long in my opinion. I like my cables about 2 meters or about 7 feet long. That seems to work best for me. If they get too short, I have a hard time, either sitting at my desk or sitting in front of my audio rack. You know, if it's up on a high shelf or something, sometimes a short cable I got to get up real close to the shelf, or a long cable can hang on the ground, and then you got to be careful when you get up not to step on it or something, because you could damage the cable or damage the ear cup, you know, or something. Pull the headphones off your head stepping on a cable, and don't want that to happen. So 10 feet of cable isn't really necessary in my opinion, but sometimes it's nice. And I did want to mention that for my reviews I have a couple of balance cables I was able to use with this, both a 4.4 millimeter Pentagon and a 4-pin XLR balance cable, because I tried this headphone with several amps, and whenever there was a balanced output available on the amp, I did use a balanced cable with it. So anyway, I'll move in and give you a closer look at the headphone here. As you can see, it's got a different headband than the Edition XS, which has the newer style Hifiman headphone, or the headband, which is a solid pad all the way around without this. And then it's a little bit different than the Sandara too, but anyway, it has click adjustments on it, and which are fairly easy to use. It swivels this way, has a little bit of flex that way, just enough that when you put it on, it's able to twist enough to seal up good against your head, so you don't end up, at least I don't end up with a gap in front or back or anything like that. The ear pads are tapered. They're, I believe it's a synthetic leather on the outside edge, and then a nice soft cloth material on the inside, the part that touches your face. And then I think the ear cups are definitely plastic. The grills, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I think they're plastic. I think on the Aria, I think they're aluminum, but I'm not sure once again. But anyway, and then uses your standard 3.5 millimeter connections. The build quality is, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't see, you know, I've heard complaints about Hifiman build quality, and they don't use the most expensive materials. They use a lot of plastic and synthetic materials, but the quality, or you know, of the build seems to be fine. I don't see any imperfections or anything, and actually, the comfort is quite good. They feel light for their size. The ear cuffs are large, so it spreads out the weight. They've got enough clamping force that they don't move. If you tip your head forward or something, you don't have to worry about them falling off. But it's not enough to cause any discomfort. And the only issue I have as far as comfort, and it's the same with both, all three, the Edition XS, the Ananda, and the Aria, is the long egg-shaped ear cuffs are a little bit hard to get used to because they ride a little bit low. They kind of ride down on your jaw, and if you're not used to that, it can be a little bit irritating at first, but I get used to it pretty quick. It's really not a large issue. The alternative is you can adjust them up a little bit and bring, that part up under your ear. But when I do that, it seems to change the sound stage a bit. It makes the sound stage taller but narrower if I move them up too high. So moving them down low where they are down to my jaw gives a wider sound stage, a little less height to the sound stage, but wider. Otherwise, if you wear them too high up, and it's the same with all three of these Hifiman headphones that use this size ear cup, or this shape of ear cup, the sound stage, it just kind of sounds like you're in a tall, narrow room with a real tall sound stage, but not as much width. So anyway, before I get into my description of the sound, I wanted to talk about my review process a little bit. I used a combination, my music was a combination of different types of rock, some pop, some electronic, a lot of acoustical music, and a little bit of orchestral music thrown in. My source was primarily CDs, and I was using a Cambridge Audio CD transport into various decks going into the different amps, but most of the time I was probably using the Topping D70S MQA version, which is a DAC that I really like. And as far as amps, I used everything from the Hifiman EF400 combination DAC amp, which you might be able to see is sitting back here on my desk. And I do want to mention, well, it's also in the picture, really good combination. That amp works really well with this headphone. So anyway, the EF400, the iFi Zen Signature Stack, which I just sent back like a week ago, but I did have plenty of chance to use this headphone with that. The little iFi Zen DAC, this is the version 1, which went for about $129, sitting here on my desk. The Singzer SA1, and I just a week or two ago got in, about 2 weeks ago, the FIO K9 Pro, and it's the ESS version. I also still have the Burson Conductor 3 Reference combination DAC amp, and the Audio GD Master 9 amp, and R8 MK2 DAC stack. And also tried this with the Waveborn Edelweiss 3 Power Amp Plus, which is a transformer coupled all tube amp, which this headphone sounds outstanding with that, but pretty much everything does. I really like that amp. And then headphones that I compared to the Ananda would be the Hifiman Sundara, the Hifiman Edition XS, which seems to be the one everyone wants to know how those two compare, the Edition XS and the Ananda. And then the Aria Stealth. And then I also compared this to the LSA HP2 Ultra, which is one of my favorite headphones and was my recommendation the last 2 years in a row as my favorite headphone that I've reviewed so far under $1,000. And 2 years ago, it was actually my headphone of the year. And that one sells for a little bit more. It sells for $7.99 compared to $6.99 for the Ananda. But really, really like that headphone, and I finally got a chance to compare that to the Ananda directly, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So getting into the sound of the Ananda, I would describe the sound signature as being basically neutral, maybe a slight emphasis in the mid-bass. And the mid-range is a little on the warm side. It's actually very pleasant. I really like the mid-range and really like the way female vocals sound out of this headphone. They don't sound dry. They have a nice, warm, rich, kind of liquid sound, and just very, very enjoyable to listen to. The bass extension, I need to talk about that a little bit, because when I did my first impressions of this headphone, when I do my first impressions, I usually don't do a whole lot of comparing, just real brief, real quick comparison sometimes, or other times not at all. Well, anyway, in my first impressions video, and I just watched it a little while ago, said that the sub-bass extension was actually better than that of the Edition XS. And a couple people called me out on that, and I took more time and listened to it, and they are right and I was wrong. The Ananda does not extend as low as the Edition XS. What I was hearing is the Ananda is more dynamic. It has more punch to the sound, especially in the mid-bass, so that mid-bass having more punch and more slam to it than on the Edition XS, which has kind of a softer sound, made it sound like it was, to me, like it was producing more sub-bass, but it actually isn't. It isn't going as low as the Edition XS, but I'll do a more complete comparison of those two in a second. So it has pretty decent sub-bass extension, but not as low as some other headphones. But it's got really good bass. The treble extends as far as I can hear. So anyway, the bass, I would say I really like the bass on this headphone. It's got some, it's dynamic. It's got punch and slam to it, but it's really tight and really well controlled. So it doesn't go super low in the sub bass, but it has really good mid bass. I really like it. The mids are, like I said, on the warm side of neutral, very pleasant, very rich, very liquid sounding. Never sounds dry or analytical, but yet doesn't lack in detail at all. The treble is, in my opinion, well balanced. It extends well. It has good sparkle to it, but it doesn't sound harsh to me. I've never heard it come across as sounding harsh. But I will admit, I have always liked Hifiman treble. I don't find it too bright. Some people do find Hifiman treble to be on the bright side, but maybe because of my age, I don't find it too bright. I'm sure that, my hearing is rolled off a little bit in the higher frequencies. Excuse me a second. So anyway, getting into the detail of and the resolution, that is the really strong point of this headphone. This headphone has exceptional detail all the way through the frequency response and holds its own against headphones 2, 3, even 4 times its price as far as detail. There are a couple of headphones out there that out-detail it by a small amount, but most of those are quite a bit more expensive. The Aria Stealth for one, a couple of the Kennertons like the Thror, the Ragnar, they out-detail this a little bit, but those are much more expensive headphones. So as far as detail, I don't really think it can be beat for the price. The only headphone I've heard in the price range that can compete in detail with this would be the HP2 from LSA. Also, the Hifiman Sandara is real close in detail, but only in the mid-range, where this has more detail than the Sandara in the lower frequencies. Soundstage I would describe as wide, plenty of width, is good or better than most open back headphones. It has good height and it has good depth. I would say good, but not exceptional depth. And I would, this has just been my opinion of the Hifiman headphones I've reviewed so far. I've reviewed several, but I do want to point out I have not reviewed the 2 top of the line Hifiman or the electrostatic, any of the electrostatic headphones. I have not reviewed the HE1000 SE or the Sosvara. I hope I get a chance to someday, but I've reviewed most of the Hifiman headphones from the Aria down, and none of them have really had exceptional depth. They have decent depth, but just not a whole lot of sound out in front of me. But this headphone does have very good width and very good height. And as far as imaging, the imaging is precise, and you can locate every instrument. There's very good separation between the different sounds, the different instruments, the vocals, everything's separate. It doesn't ever sound like everything's coming from one place. Each instrument has its own location in the sound stage. The dynamics, this is a dynamic headphone. It's got slam, it's got punch. Not the absolute last word in dynamics, and I'll talk about that in a minute in comparison to a few other headphones, but I would consider it above average as far as punch and slam. It is a dynamic headphone. So getting into my comparisons, I'm going to start out with the Sandara. Compared to the Sandara's strongest point is its detail. It's an exceptionally detailed headphone for its price, which originally was $499, then down to $350, now I believe down to $299. That is a strong point of the Sandara. You can't beat it as far as detail and resolution at that price. The Ananda, in my opinion, is just as detailed, but the detail extends into the lower frequencies where better than the Sandara does. The mid-range on the Sandara is kind of, in my opinion, a little on the dry and analytical side, where this has more warmth and a richer mid-range, but just as detailed or even more so than the Sundara. Also, this probably, I would say, extends slightly more into the sub bass, but definitely has more weight and more punch to the mid bass than the Sundara. So basically, it sounds quite a bit like the Sundara, but I would say better in every single way. Plus, it's slightly easier to drive. So I can't think of anything offhand that the Sundara does better than this headphone. Okay, moving on to the Edition XS. Like I mentioned earlier, the Edition XS does go lower into the sub bass. It has more weight in the sub bass. But as far as I'm concerned, that's about it. That's the only thing the Edition XS does better than the Ananda. The Ananda has, in my opinion, better mid bass. It's tighter, it's better controlled, and it's more dynamic with more slam and punch. The Edition XS does have a nice warm mid-range, but the mid-range on the Ananda is similar in tone, but definitely has more detail and more resolution. I'm hearing a lot more than I do with the Edition XS. The treble is kind of similar in my opinion. The Ananda is definitely more dynamic. The Edition XS, in my opinion, has kind of a soft sound to it, where the Ananda is a lot more punchy and it just has a quicker sound, like quicker attack on each note, and compared to the Edition XS, and just a cleaner. The Edition XS sounds slightly veiled to me in the mid-range compared to the Ananda. And like I said, the Ananda, the bass is tighter and better controlled. So in my opinion, the one thing the Edition XS does better is that's a little better extension into the sub bass, but I feel that the Ananda is better in every other way than the Edition XS. I can't think of anything other than the sub bass that the Edition XS does better than the Ananda. Okay, moving on to the Aria Stealth. The Aria Stealth, in my opinion, has pretty much perfect tone balance. It doesn't really get any better. It's just the entire balance from sub bass all the way to the upper treble is just perfect on the Aria. In my opinion, if the Aria Stealth had the soundstage width of the original version 1 or version 2, it would be an almost perfect headphone. That's its only flaw, is it doesn't have a real wide soundstage. And the soundstage width of the Aria Stealth is a little strange because the music, the instruments, are actually decent. They're pretty wide. But sometimes the vocals, and it's not always, in some recordings with the Aria Stealth, the vocals sound really, really narrow right in the center and almost have a mono sound to them. But others, vocals, they have more width and wrap around more. So it's different from recording to recording. But sometimes if you get the right recording, the vocals can just sound dead center in the middle, really narrow, which some people actually prefer that. They say it sounds more like speakers that way, where you don't have the super stereo effect of the vocals wrapping around your head. But I actually kind of like that. That's why I'm a big fan of headphones. I like that wrap around sound that, see, it sounds like it's coming from all the way around my head. So anyway, so the Aria Stealth. Okay, this Aria Stealth has better sub-bass extension than the Ananda, similar to that of the Edition XS, but much cleaner, much tighter, much better controlled than the Edition XS. So compared to the Aria, compared to the Ananda, the Aria Stealth has better extension into the sub bass and more weight to the mid bass and even more punch to the mid bass. It just has really good mid bass in my opinion. Okay, the Aria Stealth has a similar tone balance to the mid-range. On the warm side of neutral, very pleasant, very enjoyable, but even more detail than the Ananda. The Ananda is one of the most detailed headphones I've heard. The Aria Stealth is up there as high or equal to or better than any other headphone I've heard in detail. I mean, there's nothing that I can say that I've heard so far up to this day that out details the Aria Stealth. So this Ananda isn't quite on that level. It's like 95% of the way there, but not quite. So basically, but the soundstage. The soundstage of the Ananda is wider than that of the Aria Stealth. So basically, I would say the soundstage width is the one place that the Ananda beats the Aria Stealth. In all other respects, the Aria Stealth, by a little bit, beats out the Ananda in every other way. But I did want to mention, I think I mentioned this in my first impressions video, that in my opinion, the Ananda, which is in between the Edition XS and the Aria Stealth, actually closer to the Edition XS in price, but sound-wise, I feel that the Ananda is actually closer to the Aria Stealth in performance. I think it's a definite step up from the Edition XS. Not quite on the level of the Aria Stealth, but not too far behind it for what, $600 less. The Aria Stealth is still $12.99. It was $15.99. So anyway, yeah, I feel that the Ananda, other than that sub bass issue, is a definite step up from the Edition XS, and it'll take you like 90% of the way to the Aria Stealth for a little more than half the price. It's only $699, so it's $600 cheaper. So, you know, if you can afford the Aria Stealth, yeah, I think it's a better headphone. But that $600 is a big difference, and you can get almost there with this headphone. So the last headphone I wanted to compare this to is the LSA HP2 Ultra, which I think I mentioned earlier was my headphone of the year 2 years ago. And they have a similar sound, well, I would say a similar sound quality, but they have differences. There's quite a few differences actually. And one of the biggest differences is that the HP2 is a closed back headphone. But what is unusual is the HP2 actually has an exceptionally wide soundstage for a closed back headphone, and I'm not the only one that feels that way. I've heard a lot of people say that. Okay, so even though it's a closed back, the soundstage is almost as wide, real close to the Ananda. In fact, sometimes the vocals actually sound wider and wrap more around my head with the HP2. Okay, so comparing the two, what the HP2 does better. The HP2 definitely has better extension into the sub bass. It has more, it goes lower and it has more weight to the sub bass, but being a closed back, that does give an advantage as far as sub bass. Mid bass, I would say the HP2 has a slightly more weight to the mid bass, slightly more punch, and is slightly tighter. So bass wise, the HP2 is definitely my favorite. And then the treble is, I would say, kind of similar between the two. I'm not hearing large differences. Where the Ananda has an advantage over the HP2. The one weakness, the one thing that if I could change about the HP2 would be that the mid-range is slightly on the dry side, and female vocals can sound a little dry, a little analytical, just lacking texture, lacking detail, and I wish that the vocals were a little bit warmer on the HP2, the female vocals, where the Ananda does a very good job with female vocals. So I actually enjoy listening to vocals better with the Ananda than I do the HP2. But I did want to point out that I was using the stock ear pads on the HP2, and a long time ago, back when Kennerton sent me the Ragnar for review, they sent me an extra pair of the smaller ear pads, the 95 millimeter ear pads. The Ragnar uses 105 millimeter. And I never did use them on anything. And last week I decided to try them on the HP2, and they happen to be memory foam, where the older ear pads were not memory foam. So they're slightly thinner, but they're memory foam. So I tried those on the HP2, and it actually, in my opinion, significantly improved the sound of the HP2. And I wish I had tried them 10 months ago when I first got the ear pads. It definitely warms up the mid-range and female vocals. Not quite to the level of the Ananda, but it brings it much closer, and it doesn't harm the sub bass or the mid bass. And I think it actually gives the HP2 a more three-dimensional sound with more depth to it. So before I changed the ear pads, I was kind of leaning towards the Ananda, but because of the vocals. But after changing the ear pads, it's more on a level playing field now, and the HP2 does have the better sub bass, so it's kind of close. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do an update video on the HP2 and talk about switching over the ear pads and the changes it made. And then I think I'm going to actually do a shootout video between the Ananda and the HP2 before, well, I still have this and I'm able to do that. So I'm hoping to do that. I'm also hoping to do a full video dedicated to a complete comparison of the Edition XS, the Ananda, and the Aria Stealth, and just go through each category and compare the three and the differences and similarities. But anyway, so as far as the sound of this headphone, I'm just really impressed. It's kind of on the neutral side. You know, it's not a bass head headphone. If you're a bass head looking for huge bass, there's probably better choices. But if you're looking for a pretty much down the road neutral headphone with a slightly warm mid-range, slight emphasis to the bass, exceptional clarity, nice wide soundstage, I mean, I can't think of anything. This headphone does not have any significant flaws, in my opinion. If I could change anything about this headphone, the only thing I would do is give it a little bit more extension into the sub bass. But other than that, this is a really good headphone, and a really good headphone for the price of $699. It matched up with every amp I tried it with, even the little $129 version 1 of the Zendak from iFi. Even that does a good job. It does scale well with more expensive headphone amps. You know, hooked up to the Audio GD stack, it sounds incredible. Hooked up to the Waveborn Power Amp Plus, it sounds incredible. The tube amp does give it more depth and more of a three-dimensional sound. But yeah, I really like this headphone. I can very easily recommend it. I think it's a great price. I'm hoping to get to compare it to the Stealth version sometime in the near future. And like I said, I'm going to do a video and compare this directly to the HP2 from LSA, because this is definitely a contender for my favorite headphone that I've reviewed so far under $1,000. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so. And the Headphone Experience on Facebook is up to almost 19.2 thousand members. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, we added 48 members in one day. So you're all welcome over there. And once again, thanks for watching my video.